Hello, welcome to the second episode of our new podcast, The Superpower of Confidence, in which we explore the topic of confidence, confidence in others, confidence in oneself, in the world. What does it mean? How can you become more confident? We support an idea of confidence that is not arrogance, that is humble and loving. And in episode 2, we're discussing with a specialist on some of these issues. I'm very excited to have as a guest Dr. Joe Burgo, who's the author of Why Do I Do That? The Narcissist You Know, and most recently, How to Build Self-Esteem. So it's a perfect third book in our topic. Hi, Joe.
Hi, nice to be here, Ben.
Thank you for coming to the podcast. Should I call you Dr. Joe? What do you
Call me Joe, please. Just Joe.
Okay, Joe. So Joe, who are you?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been a practicing therapist for almost 40 years now. I have been in private practice most of that time. I'm also a writer. I've written several books that fall into the realm of popular psychology. I've also written several novels. I also write for the press, for different blogs, for newspapers. I'm quoted regularly in the media when it comes to topics like especially narcissism. These days I get a lot of requests to talk about Donald Trump and narcissism, since that's one of my big topics. Shame and self-esteem, my other topics.
Did you almost feel that he should be reelected so that you can keep getting these quote requests?
Oh, please, no. I was so burnt out. I am burnt out on talking about Donald Trump. I mean, I'm sick of that subject.
Okay, good. All right. So actually, your books is how I've come to know you. I read Why Do I Do That? Your first popular psychology book. I was trying to be a better writer and understand more the concept of unconscious desires from characters, because I had read that characters, they want something, but also sometimes they do something that they want, but they're not aware that they want it. And so I was looking for some kind of psychology book about that. And I found your Why Do I Do That? And for me, it went much beyond becoming a better writer. It was like a revelation for my own life. And this is how I got to know you. I reached out to you. I may or may not have consulted with you. This is not. This won't be a discussion topic for today. But anyway, so your third book is building self-esteem, and this goes. Self-esteem is very related to confidence. First of all, is self-esteem the same as confidence? Do you have yourself a definition of confidence?
I think they're related. I actually like the idea of confidence and self-confidence much better than I like self-esteem. The problem with self-esteem is that it's usually talked about as being low or high, and it sounds like if you just top it up a little bit, you could have high self-esteem. And I don't
Right.
like that way of looking at it. I like self-confidence because I think at the heart of what we think of as self-esteem is this idea of of I like the word confidence because it has this sense of confiding in oneself, of knowing oneself well, of being able to trust oneself. That I think is the basis of self-confidence, is that it has to be built on this feeling that you know yourself well and you can trust yourself to come through when you need yourself to do it. I guess another way of saying it is has to be based on something. It has to be earned rather than giving yourself, self-affirmations or telling yourself you're great. I don't subscribe to that view at all.
Yeah. So, I was an avid reader for many years of my life to these books that tells you to look at yourself in the mirror and repeat to yourself, I am successful, or I am this, I am that, and as if this would come by magic, but you don't subscribe to this view.
No, I think you have to earn it. You can't just tell yourself it is so. You have to prove to yourself that you actually, have reason to feel confident going into a situation. I think a good example for me is when I started doing interviews, my first interviews like 10 years ago, I was really nervous about
Yeah.
it, because it was a new experience for me. I had no idea whether or not I would be able to do it. I didn't know my subject matter as well as I do now. Now, after having done hundreds of interviews and being able to answer questions on the spot, to have have possession of my thoughts, to express myself well, I now trust myself to do it. I've proved to myself that I know my material and I can explain it well in the heat of the moment, so to speak. So, I've earned my confidence, right? There's a reason why I feel confident. It's not just that I told myself, I proved it to myself. And I think if you don't have a reason to feel confident, like if you don't really know what you're talking about, if you haven't done the work to get where you want to be, if you're not truly an authority in your area, why should you feel self-confident, right? There's no reason to feel confident.
So it's okay if I don't feel confident right now, hosting this podcast on confidence,
You should feel a little nervous because it's new and you're doing great, but you're gaining confidence in yourself through experience, right?
right? So good. So I don't have to feel so guilty about not feeling so super confident. Launching a platform on the topic of confidence. Um, so it's interesting you say that, because for me, I had two really defining moments of confidence in my life. So one was last December when I felt, confident in my comedic abilities. And there I felt like it was a trust that I earned. Okay. So it was a trust in myself. I was like, okay, I've dedicated 3.5 years to this. And I've reached a certain level where I trust myself to be able to deliver the goods if I'm booked on a show. But earlier, in 2008, this is when I graduated from my MBA, and this was the financial crisis. So it was very difficult to find a job, and I was kind of in the very low moment in my life, very depressed, and but then I managed to gain a kind of confidence that was not based on that was not based on achievement. Like it was not a trust that I could see into things that I had achieved, but it was a certain feeling that, okay, if I keep on moving forward, if I keep making steps, something will come out, something good will come out of it. And I cannot really explain why, where this feeling came from. And it was not based on external achievement. It was based on some achievement that, I was ticking some boxes of some actions that I was doing every day to try to get somewhere. But it was not definitely, like I wasn't sure that I could trust myself to get a job at the time, because it had been so many months that that I was looking. But I felt that, okay, if I tick these boxes every day and I do things in my control and everything, things are gonna be all right. Where does this feeling come from if it's not based in achievements?
I think there was a kind of achievement there. You just might not be thinking about it as the ultimate achievement of getting the job, but knowing you, I know you work really hard at things. You're persistent. You learn what you need to learn about what it takes to be successful in a particular area. For instance, in the realm of comedy, you've done an enormous amount of work on learning what makes things funny, what makes a stand-up comedian funny, how they're successful, why they're successful. You study, you work, you rehearse. I mean, trusting yourself to do the work that's necessary is another kind of earned confidence, I think. You're a hard worker.
I think that's actually a super good, because when people have no achievement to feel proud of or to trust themselves on, like maybe that's the core confidence that they can rely on. Is just, okay, I trust myself that I'll be able to do the work, and then I just trust that something good will happen out of it.
I think that self-discipline is a related concept.
Okay.
I think it's the foundation of the kind of confidence we're talking about. Is you need to know that you can do the work, you can show up, you have discipline to follow through on things. I think that's where it starts. If you don't have that, how can you have confidence in yourself? If you're undisciplined, if you don't show up, if you can't rely on yourself to do what you expect yourself to do, why should you have confidence in yourself?
That's interesting. So and in a way, you're right. This is kind of a earned confidence with yourself, that you prove to yourself that you can show up and do the work, and move forward.
I think that this idea of self-discipline is really it's the very basis of everything. I think it
Yeah.
all starts there. You know,
Okay.
trusting yourself to do what you expect yourself to do is one way of saying it.
Good. That's a great insight for people who are listening. One of the theme in your work that always comes back is the concept of shame. Um, Without giving away your entire book, what is how can you explain shame for our listeners?
I talk about shame in a way that's a little different, for starters, from the way most people talk about it. I think that shame is a normal emotion. Evolution-wise, it's built into our genes. There's a really good reason why it's there. So I don't think of shame as this uniformly toxic feeling that we've all got to get rid of and rise above shame. I think shame is a good thing. For instance, sometimes I think we feel ashamed of ourselves because we have disappointed ourselves. We've disappointed the expectations we hold for ourselves, often really reasonable expectations. I mean, I know this is true for me on a regular basis, that I do things that I feel like I let myself down.
Yeah.
Um, so in that sense, shame is kind of the opposite of confidence. It's like it's like the opposite of self-esteem, because it's where you actually don't live up to your expectations. You don't follow through on what you expect of yourself. So I think that shame is
Yeah.
actually can be an experience that helps you to grow. In fact, that's the subtitle of
Yeah.
of this new book. It's how learning from shame helps us to grow. I mean, if you can bear
Mm-hmm.
feeling shame, which most of us have a hard time tolerating shame, if you can bear from it, sometimes, often, I think it has a message. It contains a message to us to say, look, you're not following through. You're not living up to your expectations. You need to try harder. You need to do better in this area, rather than, just saying, oh,
Mm.
just batting aside the shame and saying, "Oh, I have no reason to feel ashamed," or other people are trying to make me feel ashamed, or, "No, I'm great. I shouldn't feel ashamed." I mean, none of that works. It's the act of listening to and learning from shame that will help you to develop the kind of confidence you're talking about, Ben.
Hmm. But for example, one of the most shameful experiences is to go on the comedy stage and bomb and have nobody laugh at your joke. Like that is so painful, and it's full of shame. I used to translate that shame, because it's a real feeling of it's a true discomfort in the body, right? It's really hard to live with it, and it's very painful. But that pain was so hard that I translated it into, oh well, then I'm shit, or so I'm not meant to do comedy, or I translated into something that was in my deep nature. So all of a sudden it became not just about bombing that night, but translating it into who I am at my deep core. And I'm not sure, first, is that normal? Do a lot of people do that?
I think a lot of people do that, and I do think that's sort of the experience that people refer to when they use the word shame. That's usually what they mean, is that I'm just basically defective. I'm not worth it. I can't do it. And that kind of pervasive soul-killing shame is really destructive. And
Yeah.
there's kind of nothing to be gained from it. It's just destructive. So I agree with that view of shame, that it's toxic. We need to try and rise above that, which is what you did. You ultimately didn't sit and accept this feeling that there's just something fundamentally wrong with you. You'll never be a stand-up. You can't do it. What you did, and ultimately, is you tried harder. You kept at it. You didn't let that feeling defeat you, but you kept learning more, gaining more experience, working harder, until you reached that point you described, where you were confident in yourself going on the stage. You had enough experience to know you could deliver. So you learned from your shame, or in spite of your shame,
Yeah.
maybe.
But it was kind of like what kept me going was, at some point I became conscious, okay, maybe it's not me at my core who's who's not meant to be a stand-up. Maybe it's just that night that I didn't manage to make it work. But to get there, I just had to go in a bit of a gamble, I had to, I guess, I don't know. I just had to trust the work, and that that the work would lead to something. But what is the fine line between trusting that if you put in the work, things will improve, and delusion? If there is any.
I think learning from experience is the difference. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you have done, is you've always learned from experience. I mean, the time you're talking about when you bombed, it probably
Yeah.
wasn't very funny. And you went back
Oh
and you
yeah, no, it
figured
wasn't. Yeah.
and you went back and you figured out why it wasn't funny, right? There were reasons why. You learned from the experience of not being funny how to be funny. And I think that's how we grow, is we take those shame experiences as lessons rather than as ultimate defeats.
Yeah, it took me, because when I was 20, I took it as an ultimate defeat, or 25, I stopped doing stand up for 15 years. And then eventually I went back to it, but it's a process. It can be a long process.
I don't know about you, but I really subscribe to that 10,000 hours theory, that to be really good at something, you've got to put in like your 10,000 hours. That's a lot of work. So,
Yeah.
when you're just beginning, why should you be really good at it?
Yeah.
It's unrealistic to expect yourself to be good.
But I think it's a good belief to have, that if you put in the work, eventually you'll be good at it. Like the failure that you experience in the beginning is not inherent to your nature, and trusting that the work will make you rise above these challenges and make you a better, whatever you're trying to do.
I totally agree. I mean, it's an underlying
Um,
basic trust in yourself that you will ultimately succeed even if you're not all that great now.
One of the ideas that really also was a revelation for me in Why Do I Do That, in your first book, is that um, babies have an inherent expectation of what is a good way that they should be treated. Because before I thought, okay, if you've always been treated bad, how do you, if the only thing you know, right? But that there's like some kind of an instinct in us that there's expectations of a child and a baby of how they should be treated, and if that doesn't happen on a regular basis, is this where the feeling of core shame rises? Is it usually, does it usually come from there?
I definitely think so. I think there is this innate expectation that you're going to have a parent, a parenting object, mother, father, that's going to think you're worthwhile and care for you and treat you as if you're worthwhile, lovable. And when you don't get that, you tend to interpret it as, oh, then there must be something wrong with me. I'm defective because it's natural for a parent to love a child, and if mine don't, then I must be defective. I think that's a really, really common experience for many people growing up with less than adequate parents, is they tend to blame themselves rather than recognizing that they have deficient parents. It's also pretty frightening for a small child to think that you have bad parents, given that you're entirely dependent on them for your life. I mean, to
Right, that's true.
recognize to recognize that these people that you depend on for life are like really bad at their job, that's kind of scary.
Like, how was this evidence that these expectations exist in children, or even in small children that are not able to vocalize or express what, these types of feeling?
Well, I mean, there's a really great set of experiments that were done with mothers and babies that were, like less than a year old. And they're called the still face experiment. They were done in, I think
Okay.
it was in Boston. And they show these babies, and they have mothers that are very interactive with them. And there's this whole dialogue, pre-verbal dialogue going on of gestures and sounds and everything. And then they have the mothers like freeze, make their faces blank, stop smiling, ignore the baby. And these babies get so upset. They they get so distraught they cannot contain themselves. They get
Right.
overwhelmed. And I
Yeah.
think it demonstrates this: babies are seeking relationship, and they're seeking this kind of mirroring relationship with their parents where they're made to feel worthwhile, the center of their parents' universe, beautiful, perfect, whole, whatever it is we want to talk about, that experience that's kind of unconditional love. That's what they want. And then when they don't get it, they fall apart. It's actually, these videos are so distressing, they're painful to watch.
Okay.
To see these babies,
Okay.
they're on YouTube if anybody wants to watch them. But I think it shows that from a very early age, babies are relationship seeking, and what they want is this feeling that they're really important and beautiful and valuable to their parents.
Yeah. What I got from your second book, the Narcissist. So the second book is The Narcissist You Know. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that, people develop narcissist personalities because this core shame is just so unbearable that they are trying to push it down. Why do certain people become narcissists to the point that they're not even conscious that they are, doing this, and that they're not even conscious of their core shame feeling, and they're just trying really hard to, to push it down by, I'm such a great character, or and why do some other people, don't fall into that trap? Do you know?
That's the $64,000 question. I wish I had a definitive answer. I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that it has to do with the amount of shame, that shame becomes so much that it really becomes unbearable. Some people just, it's too much. They cannot bear to face it, and all they can do is defend against it, try and ward it off, deny that it's true, develop a kind of a false personality that's meant to, deny the underlying shame. Whereas other people who have less toxic amounts of shame are able to bear with it and learn from it and grow from it. So I think it's a question of
Yeah.
degree. That's my theory.
Okay. So sometimes it's just too much, and they develop such personalities. And is there a way back from narcissism?
If yeah, this is the most common question I get off of my blog and people
Oh,
writing to
really?
me asking for advice, and it's usually about
I'm sorry.
somebody else. My husband is a narcissist. Is there any hope for him? This is the usual question, and um, the answer is it's not a very optimistic answer. Is that unless that person recognizes that they've got an issue, that they need help, there's kind of no hope. You can't
Right.
force someone to face their difficulties. And when core shame is extreme and the defenses are rock hard, when you've got an extreme narcissistic personality, then there's almost no hope of reform.
Bon. Okay, let's switch back to something more positive. Well, actually, I don't know if the next question is positive, because you know, when I stepped into a place of more confidence, I noticed that some of my relationships kind of, degraded, or even, I lost contact with some people. Is it something that you see, that some people cannot handle you becoming confident?
I think somebody who's very self-confident is threatening to a person who does not have much self-confidence. They tend to compare themselves unfavorably to you. They might feel envious. They would probably find it very hard to rejoice with you in your success because it reminds them of the ways in which they feel like a failure. I think that's really common. I think people often tend to associate with other people who are at similar levels. It's kind of like, even like socioeconomically, people don't tend to associate regularly with people who have a lot more money than they do, because it's uncomfortable to constantly compare yourself to somebody who's way wealthier or more successful than you are. I think in this same way, it can be uncomfortable to be hanging around somebody who's very self-confident when you're not. It just kind of makes you feel worse about yourself. So I think envy is a big problem in those situations. And what you want to seek out, and what's hard to
Mm.
find, are those people who are your peers, really, and who can truly rejoice with you in your successes, who um, who make
Mm.
you feel good about who you've achieved. That's, to me, the last phase in my book on building self-esteem, the last phase in kind of consolidating self-esteem and self-confidence, is to be able to share your joy in achievement and your good feelings about yourself with people who can reciprocate it, who actually
Yeah.
are happy for you. That just, to me, just consolidates the whole thing. It's hard to find.
Yeah. But it scares me a little bit when I heard you say very self-confident, because people associate that with arrogant. Um, and how's the fine line between those two?
Yeah, well, I think I think I have the answer to that question. I think
Great.
the difference is that genuine self-confidence, genuine self-esteem, it's like it's an expanding universe. It's like, I feel good about myself, I'm successful, and I want you to feel good about yourself, and I want you to be successful, and there's room for all of us. Whereas arrogance, or let's say narcissism, it's a fixed pie view of the universe, where there's only so much self-confidence to go around, and if you have more, that means I have less, so I have to knock you down and build myself up at your expense. So I think there are people who are very self-confident, verging on arrogant, who have a way of subtly making other people around them feel bad.
Yeah.
That's kind of their MO. They feel better about themselves by making other people feel bad.
I think I think it's probably my last question, but at the end of your book, you say that one of the way to build confidence is to set realistic goals with yourself. You give the example, if you or even me, we decided, okay, we want to be Olympic gold medalists, we probably will not. We would set ourselves up for failure. This is kind of hard to take because you don't want to, it's like you don't want to shortchange yourself on your life, right? You want to, there's this fear that, okay, if I set, realistic goal, am I aiming too low? Like, am I missing out on my potential?
I don't see it that way. I see it as like building blocks. It's like there's stages. That book Atomic Habits, which I think is a
Yeah.
good book. It's like
Yeah.
you just because you set a small goal in the beginning doesn't mean that you're going to stick with small goals. It just means, okay, here's an achievable goal. I have this expectation for myself. I follow through, I'm successful, and I build a good feeling about myself, right? And then I can ask
Yeah.
a little bit more, and then I ask more. But you kind of have to build up to it, as opposed to I'm starting running now, and today I'm going to go out and run a marathon, right? You can't do that.
I have to say your last book begins with a shame test, and I cringed at every question of that test. Like, it's really, and it actually it yeah, I did feel that feeling of shame is such a it's really something you feel inside of you. Like, it's very powerful. And then it made me think, also when you wrote about, you build trust in yourself because you look in your achievements. But my worst gigs ever, they still haunt me. Like I have 2-3 gigs in my life that was like the disaster of all disasters for me at that moment. One was in front of my theater teacher, and I think I've learned to trust myself. But why did this still come up once in a while? Like this horrible feeling of I failed miserably, and I'm a loser, or
Well, but that isn't the takeaway. You might be haunted by this shame feeling, but you didn't take away from it permanently that you are a loser, right? You
No.
probably, you know, it's doing it in front of your theater teacher had to be agonizing. And I think we've all got those shame experiences from our past that are just going to be with us for life. I'm sorry to tell you, it will be
Make
there
it
forever.
disappear, Joe.
No, I have those too. I call them cringing shame moments where this memory will just suddenly surface and my whole body flinches. Like
Yeah.
everything tightens up because it's so painful. They're
Yeah.
just there, but they're not defining in the sense that they didn't stop you, right? They didn't hold you back.
that's what your shame test did to me.
It didn't stop you though. You went on.
No, we're not. No, but I think it's a good I think it's a good conclusion. It's kind of what you're saying is that you build self-confidence through that feeling of shame. It's still, it stays, but it develops into, I don't know, something different that is not so much part of, your core identity, but more, okay, here's an experience where I really screwed up.
It's clearly the case with you. It didn't stop you, and you've gone on for years working really hard to master your craft to achieve this level of confidence you're talking about. It doesn't mean you're shame-free, right?
No, still there. Okay, Joe. So before we leave, what type of fiction books are you writing?
The book I just finished writing is the opening installment in an epic fantasy series. My very first novel, which I wrote when I was in my early 20s, was a science fantasy novel. I read a lot of fantasy fiction when I was a teen, and now I've gone back to that genre, but I'm trying to write it more as psychological fiction, rather than dragons and swords. So I'm trying to see if I can take that genre and at the risk of sounding a little pompous, elevate it to the level of literary psychological fiction, which is, it's in keeping with all my other interests. I'm always interested in psychology, and that's what I write about, whether or not it's nonfiction or epic fantasy.
And do you feel confident in yourself as you do that?
I really do. I mean, I really feel I had my doubts in the middle of this book. It took me a long time to write it, but at the end of it, I just feel really good about this book. I love this book. It's not necessarily for everybody, but I achieved what I set out to do, and that makes me feel really good.
Cool. So what's the title of the book?
A Grim Light Rising. And the series is called The Illuminariad, and its next book is underway. So maybe I'll spend the rest of my life writing this series of books.
And then can you remind us your third book, the title of your third book?
Building Self-Esteem, How Learning from Shame Helps Us to Grow.
Thank you so much, Joe. It was really nice talking to you, and very, very good insights for people listening to us.
Thank you, Ben. It was really fun talking with you.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.
Thank you for listening to episode 2 of the Superpower of Confidence. Please subscribe to this podcast, and if you're listening on iTunes, please leave a review. They're really helpful. Check out the books written by Dr. Joe Burgo. The titles are Why Do I Do That? His second book is The Narcissist You Know, and his third book, Building Self-Esteem. If you'd like to book me as a speaker, a trainer, or a comedian, or find out more about me, subscribe to my newsletter, go to bendelahaye.com. All the links will be in the show notes. Until next time, take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye.